Hello and welcome back. Another edition of Big Red Huddle. Today is January 27th, 2024. We're going to talk all things Husker athletics. Today's show, we're going to focus quite a bit on Nebraska basketball, which isn't typical for us. We had a big week with games against Northwestern and Ohio State. We'll recap some of those. We will get into a few football headlines. A little bit of a quiet period here until we get into spring ball, and then we'll wrap up with a couple of national storylines. And within the episode, I've got two really what I would call hot takes that I really want to interact with the audience on. Do I have anybody on my side? Do you agree with these takes, or am I on an island by myself, which happens quite a bit, and I'm okay with that. So again, just since we are so new into this, we are on Apple iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. All of those can be found at Big Red Huddle. We also have the website up and going, bigredhuddle.com. We got the podcast feeding into that with a couple of additional elements on there from this past week. So with that, let's huddle up and let's get into today's agenda. So full disclosure, I am recording this in the middle of the Maryland game. My initial plan was to wait until after the Maryland matchup and really discuss some of the outcomes from there. Full disclosure, we're 8 minutes to go in the game, and we're down by 24. So not gonna focus so much on that during this episode. We'll hit on it a little bit here as we get through Nebraska basketball, but let's take a step back and go back a week to Northwestern. So think about where this team was at the time coming into this game, coming off of that just disaster in Piscataway. Juwan Gary looked like he was out for the year. Got some good news on that just prior to the game last Saturday. Sounds like it's just a calf strain, will be out a couple weeks. Obviously didn't play against Northwestern, but this was just a really good response from the team holistically coming off of that performance. Wasn't really sure how they would respond. Northwestern's a dang good basketball team. So finished it out 75-69. Fantastic environment in PBA. It was alumni weekend. Return of Danny Nee. A lot of those guys from the 90s were back in the house. That's where I grew up. That's my time frame. Eric Strickland, Eric Piakowski. Piakowski hitting that shot at halftime from midcourt just brings back a lot of really cool memories. But getting back to the game itself, the story of this game for me was rebounding and defense. Wasn't sure how the team would be in those areas specifically without Juwan Gary. He's kind of what I would consider the enforcer on the team. Does a lot of things within the game that don't necessarily show up in the stat sheet. But we finished plus 14 in rebounds. Sam Hoiberg was just unreal on defense. Really just bottling up Northwestern's best player, Boo Buie. Fred, after the game, even said Bowie's one of the top 5 point guards in the country, not just the Big Ten. He finished 2 of 15 from the field with just 9 points, well under his season average. Got to give a lot of credit to Sam Hoiberg in that position. And then you come down the stretch. I think we were up 6 there with a minute and a half to go. Some really poor offensive possessions on Nebraska sides. Northwestern comes down, cuts it to 2. We have the possession with about 30 seconds to go. Again, nothing real. The ball's not really moving. Don't have a lot of cohesiveness there on the offensive end. Tominaga just steps up and hits just a crazy three-pointer with the shot clock winding down. Just up 2 at that point. Crowd goes nuts. Tominaga goes nuts. And, we were kind of teetering at that moment and just, massive stones on Tominaga to A, take that shot, B, to just nail it, nothing but net. Just a really cool moment there in PBA. And I should also mention Josiah Alec within that game. With Gary out, he then comes back into the starting lineup. 15 points, 5 boards, just a lot of, again, those hustle plays that don't show up in the stat sheet. And so he deserves a shout out for his performance. And so that leads us then into Ohio State on Tuesday. And the recap of this game is pretty simple. It's the Rink Mast game. I was starting to really worry about Rink Mast coming into this game. He struggled mightily at Rutgers. Didn't follow it up with a great performance at Northwestern. Was starting to wonder, is it fatigue? Is there a mental piece there? Is his knee still out of whack? Just, kind of wondering where he was as we go down the stretch of the season. Well, he answered that for me in exemplary fashion. 34 points, 13 of 17 shooting, 6 of 8 from 3-point range. Step back 3 there at the end of the first half was really impressive. So anywhere I had's out the door. Just what a performance from him. Also want to mention, not just in this game in particular, but C.J. Wilcher. I mean, personally, I had somewhat written the guy off coming into the year, and he's established himself as a legitimate Big Ten Sixth Man of the Year. He's bought into his role. Just really excited for the kid individually and him getting some of the success that he's now achieving. His 3-point shooting has been not just unreal, but consistent all year. But going into the Maryland game, he was up to 40%. You're starting to see him get more and more minutes as the season goes on. In the Ohio State game, he was up to 30 minutes in the game, which was one of the higher points within the team. And then coming back to Tominaga, This is where I'm going to start to get into that first hot take that I really want some feedback on and some dialogue. His minutes have started to decrease a little bit as we get further into Big Ten play. It was down to 27 minutes against Northwestern, reduced to just 14 versus Ohio State. And he was off the court during a lot of those big runs in the second half. And so here's where the hot take is when Tominaga is on, you've got to ride the guy, right? When he's hot, he can change a game in an instance. But when he's not on, he's a major liability on the floor, especially defensively. He's just not quick enough to stay in front of guys. He's overpowered in the post. He's really slow on rotating, on pick and rolls. And if you go back and look at the stat sheet on some of these games, he's one of the worst on the team from a plus-minus perspective of when he's on the floor. And so going back to some of my previous takes here with respect to C.J. Wilcher and Sam Hoiberg, when you get those two guys on the floor together, you obviously have Mast and you've got Bryce Williams, etc. Those are some of our better lineups. Some of our better lineups are without Tominaga on the floor. And so what I really appreciate about Fred is as the years progressed and he's identified when Tominaga is not at his strongest suit, he's not afraid to pull him out of the game. And the other thing is as Fred's developed this team and developed this lineup, he's developed it in a way that we are not 100% dependent on Tominaga going off on the offensive side of the floor. If he's off, we've got Bryce Williams, Rink Mast, Juwan Gary when he's healthy, C.J. Wilcher when he gets hot, even Jamarcus Lawrence are all capable scorers and capable of putting this team on their back in a critical situation and pulling us across the finish line. And so my hot take, I guess, would be you've got to start Tominaga. Obviously, he's one of your 5 best. But if he is not shooting just absolutely lights out, he's a liability on this team and on the floor, and we can win games without him. And so if we see him struggling early on in games, I like how Fred is taking control and pulling him from those situations and relying on some of these other guys who are also extremely talented scorers and can get the ball in the hoop. So would welcome, obviously, any and all feedback and dialogue kind of on that take. I, like everybody else, love Tominaga. I love watching the guy. The way he plays is really fun. When he's on, he's as exciting as anybody in college basketball. But when we're thinking about wins and losses and what we need. There are going to be times as we come down the stretch here where he's replaced by the C.J. Wilchers of the world, Juwan Gary and Sam Hoiberg. So something to watch as we come down the stretch here. And so, again, I was looking to record this pod after the Maryland game. Early on, we got up 12-2. It was looking really good. From there, it's really snowballed. Just looking up at the TV right now, 5:30 left to go in the game. 68-45 Maryland. Really, from the 10-minute mark in the first half on, it's been really ugly basketball for Nebraska. This team has got to figure out a way to win at least a couple on the road. We have some opportunities coming up. Those Minnesota and Rutgers games are going to hurt tremendously. But there's not a lot to recap here with the Maryland game. It's one that we're going to have to probably flush and move forward on. And so going forward, as I look at the season, I like to kind of chunk the season out into 4 or 5 game stretches. Coming into this Maryland game, this next 4-game stretch in my mind was vital when thinking about NCAA tournament, and then also potentially seeding within the NCAA tournament. So you got today at Maryland. Obviously that's now a loss. Thursday is home against Wisconsin, top 15 team. Perhaps when we see them next week, top 10. Already blew us out once in Madison. And then Sunday you turn around, you go at Illinois, another top 15, perhaps top 10 team. And then the following Wednesday at Northwestern. Obviously, we beat Northwestern at home. We just talked about that, but it's a different animal on the road. And so as I break down this 4-game stretch, which is really difficult, I was thinking in my mind, is there somehow we can scrap out 2-2 in this stretch? 2-2 would be amazing. You go 2-2, you can about punch your ticket, and then you start thinking about seeding. Maryland was probably the easiest of the 4. Some would argue maybe Wisconsin because it's at home, but that Maryland game's now an L. So how do you get 2 out of Wisconsin, Illinois, Northwestern? That's going to be really tough. Not going to say it's impossible, but it's tough. You got to get Wisconsin at home, obviously. But then, even without that, I came into this 4-game stretch. 1-3 is even okay, because after you get past this stretch of 4, the schedule lightens up tremendously with Penn State, Michigan. You got Rutgers coming back home. You got Minnesota at home. Like there's plenty of wins to be had after you get through this 4-game stretch, but you've got to get 1 at minimum. 0-4 isn't a death blow by any means, but it would sure sting quite a bit, and it would mean 3 more road losses. Again, no road wins. It would mean a home loss to Wisconsin, kind of puts you behind the 8 ball and really forces you to get extremely hot and reel off 5-6 in a row to finish out the season. So disappointing that we're gonna start off this 4-game stretch with an L. Just have to flush it and then really focus back on Wisconsin, who's coming in on Thursday. It's absolutely winnable. It's a quad 1 opportunity. At Illinois is quad 1. At Northwestern will probably be a quad 1. So you've got 3 quad 1 win opportunities ahead of you. Let's see if they can take advantage of it. And so just to wrap up basketball, coming into today, I was looking at a couple things. From a net ranking perspective, we were at 47. That's obviously going to go down after today. Maryland was 93, so it's going to be a quad 2 loss. I don't think it's not going to kill us. It'll probably take us back down into the upper 50s, mid 50s. And so that's, again, not a killer to lose at Maryland, just a huge missed opportunity. And then as of this morning, ESPN Joe Lunardi had us as a 9 seed playing Texas Tech and Boston. CBS Jerry Palm has us as an 8 seed playing in Brooklyn versus Ole Miss. So most bracketology publications out there has Nebraska squarely in the field. But we've got 3 really tough games ahead of us, as we just talked about. Got to find a way to get 1. Get 1 at least. If you get 2, you're cooking with gravy, and you're probably playing for seeding at that point. So let's see how the next week plays out. When we get together next Saturday, we'll have the Thursday game to talk about versus Wisconsin. Hopefully we're coming off of a win. We have some good feelings there as we then prepare to go on the road against Illinois and Northwestern. So that's the basketball segment today. Again, we got the one hot take that I'd really want some feedback on, the Keisei Tominaga take. I know people are going to be really disappointed after this Maryland game. It's tough to win on the road, really tough to win on the road in the Big Ten as we've seen. I just really hope those Rutgers and Minnesota games don't come back to haunt us come Selection Sunday. So let's wrap up basketball. Let's transition into some football. This is where, the pod, as we really get going and establish ourselves, this is where the pod's going to be our focus is football. We'll always hit on baseball and basketball, and then some of those women's sports as headlines come our way. But my passion is and always has been Nebraska football. So last week we talked about Glenn Thomas. He is now official co-offensive coordinator and QB coach. He was in the office this week. He's official. He's working. He's acclimating, meeting with players, beginning to form kind of his 2025 QB recruiting board. He's got some things to do on the NCAA side before he can go out and officially start on the road, getting into schools, meeting guys, etc. I do think he'll probably get out next week, which is the last week before the dead period sets in. And so as we kind of look at the 2025 QB board for recruiting purposes, there's two guys out there that are being actively recruited, have offers. First one, I'm sure all you guys are aware of, Alex Mansky out of Algona, Iowa. He's really been the top 2025 target going back over summer camp. Some recently have him trending towards Iowa State. He's also visited Texas A&M after coming off of a recent offer there. And then a new name's popped up here in the last couple weeks, Matt Zollers out of Royersford, Pennsylvania. He's the only other uncommitted 2025 QB target with an offer. A couple weeks ago, it was actually assumed he was a lean towards Penn State. Then Penn State picked up a commitment from a different 2025 QB. And so since then, Zollers has picked up offers from Nebraska, Michigan State, Kentucky, Boston College, Virginia, Georgia, and Florida. In several interviews, he's mentioned Nebraska as one that he certainly has interest in. Nothing is imminent at this point. No visits have been set up. This is where I will be interested to see if we can get Glenn Thomas on the road next week. I would assume he's for sure seeing Alex Mansky. Does he also make his way out to Pennsylvania and see Zollers? And then third, is there another QB out there that we're not aware of yet that could be in line for an offer? And so as we really evaluate the QB room holistically, it's an interesting situation and one that's going to be tough for the coaching staff to kind of thread a needle. You've got 3 quarterbacks on scholarship. Everybody knows the names. You've got 2 true freshmen, Elite 11 quarterbacks, Daniel Kalen, Dylan Raiola. And then you've got Heinrich Haarberg coming back. He'll be a junior. When you look at the QB room, you generally want 4 scholarship QBs. We're only going to have 3 going into the spring. And so as Thomas and others get out onto the road recruiting, is a big-time 2025 high school quarterback going to be willing to come in and probably sit behind a individual that's going to start as a true freshman, right? So when they come in, they'll have a true sophomore in front of them that they're going to have to try to compete with and beat out, and most likely, right, it's Raiola. So that's going to be tough. It's going to take a special individual to come in and want to do that. And so in my mind, how I evaluate or look at this, I would almost think if you can't get an Alex Mansky or a Matt Zollers, you probably punt on 2025 high school QB recruiting, and you look towards 2026, where you then have Dayton Raiola, who's waiting in the wings there. you can always come back into the transfer portal, and I actually expect them to look heavily in the transfer portal during the spring period. Can you get an experienced QB that's willing to come in and mentor and probably be second string behind a Raiola? Again, takes a special individual. You definitely got to thread a needle. I'm not going to say it's easy and you can just go out there and pluck this individual, but I do think they want a fourth quarterback in that room for 2024. And then, like I mentioned, 2025 is going to be really tough to find that individual that's kind of another alpha that believes in themselves, believes in their opportunity to come in and compete. I would personally love to see an Alex Mansky in this class. If I'm in Alex Mansky's shoes, if I'm a parent of Alex Mansky, I'm probably not coming in to sit behind Raiola. I'm looking at Iowa State. I'm looking at Texas A&M or some of these other opportunities that he has in front of him. So that's Glenn Thomas. That's really the quarterback situation as I see it today. And so as we kind of transition again, continue to get a lot of questions around Dana Holgorsen. As I mentioned last week, there's not a lot to update here, and there's really not a hurry on either side, on either Nebraska side or Dana Holgorsen's side. I mentioned last week that I foresee this going into February. Obviously now we're 5-6 days out from February, and so that's obviously likely at this point. I do think there's an open offer for Dana Holgorsen to join the staff as an analyst. I think Dana Holgorsen is very interested in that opportunity. Last week I did mention there was an LSU OC opening that they were potentially talking with Dana on. That has now been filled internally, and so that no longer is an option, and just reinforces my view, my thinking, and what I've heard is that I fully expect Dana Holgorsen to be part of this staff as an analyst. When you bring in somebody like Dylan Raiola, it obviously attracts other individuals like a Dana Holgorsen who want to be part of that. Ultimately, Dana Holgorsen's goal and objective is to become a head coach once again. And so he's just simply evaluating what gives him the best opportunity to achieve that. And as of right now, I think that will be Nebraska. But the focus right now on Nebraska side, I think, is recruiting and winter conditioning. Focus on Dana's side has been more of just R&R and evaluating the landscape of the game before jumping back in. So early February, mid-February wouldn't surprise me. I do think he'll be an analyst for Nebraska here before spring practice kicks off. So we'll continue to monitor it. We'll continue to provide weekly updates on that story because it's not going away anytime soon. So one more Nebraska football related item before we get into some national storylines, really one national storyline. Spring game details came out this Wednesday from Trev Alberts. A couple interesting things from this. We already knew the game was going to be played on Saturday, April 27th. That's later than usual. Should provide. I like the later time slot for a couple reasons. One, it gives you more time for winter conditioning before you transition into football activities. It allows you to get through spring break before you kick off spring practice. So in previous years, we've had like a week or two of spring practice. We've paused for spring break, come back and done another week or two of spring practice. This will allow us to get all the way through spring break, come back, you have a week to acclimate, and then you get right into spring practice, and you have 15 consecutive practices over a 5-week period without a break. Cap that off with the Saturday, April 27th spring game. And then you should have much better weather in late April than we've had recently in some of the early to mid-April. Last year was absolutely horrid. It was freezing cold, windy, spitty rain. And so hopefully we'll get a nice, beautiful Saturday. And so with that, another kind of interesting thing that was announced is it's an 11 a.m. kick. So that was new. Typically it's been more of a 1 p.m. kick. And so reason for the 11 a.m. kick, it provides an opportunity to accommodate fans who want to attend baseball and or softball, both on playing games that Saturday. Baseball will be against Iowa. Iowa should be the favorite for the Big Ten Conference. That'll be a big-time matchup. And then softball versus Northwestern. Northwestern's always a power on the softball side. And so get out there and see Jordy ball. So should be a really fun weekend. Football at 11. Baseball and softball times haven't been announced yet, but I know I'll be there to see football. We'll probably be trying to get in and see baseball as well. Just kind of depends on the time and what's going on that particular weekend. Another change that was announced, ticket prices have gone up by $5. So $15 for adults, $5 for students. This is a $5 increase over previous years. Previously, it was $10 for adults. Students were free. So an increase there a little bit. And then, just overall thoughts. We're going to get much deeper into spring football. I don't want to go into a lot here, but it's going to, one of the big things that Matt Rule talks about is competition. And he talks about it in every press conference. And this spring, you're going to have 23 newcomers on the roster. They're there now, 17 from the high school ranks, 6 transfers. You've got Dylan Raiola, you got Daniel Kaline for the first time. And so if you can't get excited about this spring game, probably not going to get excited about one moving forward. So I'll be there, really stoked for it, hoping we can pack the place and provide a really cool environment, not only for the newcomers, but for what will certainly be a big recruiting opportunity as well. And so before we wrap up, let's transition into national storylines. I'm only going to focus on one today. And this is where my second hot take comes in. And so this is when I think I have more of an opportunity for people to align with me than maybe the Tominaga one. And so we've hinted at it the last couple weeks. Jim Harbaugh has officially taken a job in the NFL with the Los Angeles Chargers. That's the exact landing spot that we projected last week. Wasn't a big surprise by any means. Really the perfect spot for Harbaugh to land. He's always been a huge fan of Justin Herbert. It's a role, it's a position that he's had his eyes on for a while. The overall roster is pretty talented. He's got a chance to go in there and compete immediately. Obviously, same division as the Chiefs and Mahomes. It's not going to be easy, but I think it's a really good landing spot for him. And so then the focus, obviously, for Nebraska, right, that impacts Nebraska, and for college will be, or was, who's taking over for Jim Harbaugh. Well, it was announced last night that Sherrone Moore will be the new coach at the University of Michigan. You'll know Sherrone Moore. He was the interim head coach for the last 3 games of the year for Jim Harbaugh's suspension. He also was the interim coach for one of the games at the beginning of the year where Jim Harbaugh was suspended, which is really odd to say. The guy was suspended for 6 games in 2023, but he was the offensive coordinator, offensive line coach. And so here's my hot take is I think this is an awful hire. I think this is an awful decision for Michigan. And so obviously they're trying to keep continuity. They're trying to keep the existing roster intact. But this is the University of Michigan, and Sherrone Moore's never been a head coach. He's got very little experience overall. And you see some of the names that were out there: Lance Leipold, Chris Kleiman, Brian Kelly. It feels extremely short-sighted to me to settle on Sherrone Moore for this role. Now, some people will say, well, Sherrone Moore went 4-0 as a head coach in 2023 at Michigan. Factually, that's accurate, but it's not like Jim Harbaugh wasn't there the whole time. Jim Harbaugh was the head coach from Sunday up until kickoff on Saturday. Sherrone Moore put the headset on for 3.5 hours, called the timeouts, did the play calls, etc. And then Jim Harbaugh was right back in the locker room after the game and did everything from a game planning perspective, did everything outside of game planning and football that a head coach has to take on from a roster management perspective, etc., etc. And so I just think this is really short-sighted as you think about retaining talent, which is, I think, the driving force for keeping Sherrone Moore. This team's losing a ton of talent with or without Jim Harbaugh. They're projected for up to 18 draft picks coming up in the 2024 draft. Jim Harbaugh is taking his defensive coordinator. He's taking his son as special teams coach. He's taking his strength and conditioning coach, which is one of the best in the business. And so it's not even that Sherrone Moore can keep the existing staff in place to kind of keep that cohesiveness. And so this is here's what I said to some friends earlier today, and I think it's still accurate. And where I come from is, when your arch rival, in this case Ohio State, is the most excited for this hire than anybody else in the country, you've made a mistake. And so I know those individuals up in Columbus are celebrating this move by Michigan. Ultimately, we're going to play it out over the course of the next couple of years, and we'll see if I'm right or wrong. But would welcome your thoughts. Did Michigan make the right call by hiring Sherrone Moore, or should they have taken a step back and looked more long-term, done a national search? I threw out Lance Leipold, Chris Kleiman, Brian Kelly. I'm sure there's several others that would be begging for that Michigan job. I think they could have done better. I think this is a big blow to Michigan long-term. But again, ultimately, we're going to play this out on the field, and that will decide whether this was or was not the best move for Michigan. So with that, let's wrap up. Just thank you again for listening, sticking with us. This is our 4th episode. We're continuing to build on this, continuing to build out some of our platforms. I need to get more engaged on X and Twitter, so please look me up at Big Red Huddle. Again, we are on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube. We've got our website, bigredhuddle.com. For now, our cadence is going to be on a weekly basis. I try to get a pod out every Saturday. Again, one-man show, just doing this for fun. Got a full-time job during the week. And so trying to get a pod out on the weekends. And then as we get closer to spring ball and then ultimately to the season, we will expand upon that as well. If you are listening on any of those platforms, please drop a rating. If you're listening on YouTube, give us a follow, thumbs up, helps immensely, gets the word out, and just really appreciate each and every one of you sticking with us as we kick this thing off. And so we will huddle up again next week and go Big Red. Have a great week. Thanks, guys.